Gear up for an engaging tale of bravery, determination, and change. Embark on an authentic story of an ordinary individual, struggling with dishonesty and betrayal in their marriage, who found the strength to not just withstand this difficult situation but to overcome every obstacle on their path to a renewed existence. This story will demonstrate how making the right choices and carrying out resolute actions can lead to true liberation and self-discovery. To set the scene, my spouse and I have been married for 11 years and have 2 children aged 11 and 9. Unfortunately, she was unfaithful for a period of 8 months, and I became aware of this deceit in the past 3 months. However, I chose to hold off on confronting her until I had gathered concrete proof, including video evidence, and had spoken with a dependable lawyer to prepare a separation agreement. This confrontation occurred roughly 9 months ago, often called D-Day in such cases. I calmly waited for her to return from a meeting with her affair partner, and upon spotting me at the table, her immediate reaction was to look anxious. I asked her to sit down as we needed to have a crucial conversation. By that point, I had already shed all my tears and felt no emotional connection from the moment I discovered her affair. I had resolved to pursue a divorce. My wife sat down, visibly upset. "You're scaring me. What's happening?" she asked. I reassured her that I was not there to discuss her betrayal as I was fully informed. Rather, I explained that I wanted to focus on our separation and divorce. I placed my wedding ring on the folder containing the separation agreement and slid it towards her. This action caused her to break down, and she began to beg, apologize, and implore all expected reactions. Nonetheless, I remained steadfast and disregarded everything she said. "Wife, I care about you, but you have hurt me more deeply than ever before." Being intimate with other men does not demonstrate love, I emphasized, underscoring my pain. After several hours, I suggested that she spend the night at a hotel to allow for a continued dialogue the next day. I made it clear that if she chose not to sign the separation agreement, I would immediately expose her actions to everyone. I was aware that her agreement might have been influenced by the situation, but at that moment, all I desired was to conclude the ordeal. Eventually, she agreed to sign. She left, and throughout the night I received texts and calls from her. I responded briefly, stating that I would not read her messages or discuss matters until the next afternoon. The following day, she seemed to fully grasp the gravity of the situation. She earnestly pleaded for another chance, proposed marriage counseling, and made genuine promises to do whatever was necessary. I informed her of my decision to initiate divorce proceedings on Monday and gave her a 90-day window to convince me that ending our marriage was a mistake. I'm not sure why I offered this. Perhaps I felt vulnerable after already deciding to end the relationship, yet I relented the next day. I have meticulously drafted a list of conditions for her, though I did not present the list directly to her. Instead, I informed her of its presence and explained that, unless she complies with these conditions, our interactions would strictly pertain to our children and the divorce would proceed smoothly, with me disclosing her actions to all involved. Moreover, I made it clear that even perfect adherence might not prevent the divorce. My trust in her had greatly diminished, and my love had dwindled. The sole reason I even considered preserving our relationship was for the sake of the children. It was not my intention to communicate this, but once again, I found myself straying from my original resolution. The list includes the following conditions. First, she must provide a detailed account of her involvement with him, explaining how it began and justifying her actions to both me and our children. Any attempt to hide or downplay any details would result in the termination of my efforts at reconciliation. Second, she is required to grant me full access to her social media, phones, computers, earnings, and bank statements. Third, she must regularly update me on her whereabouts and activities. Fourth, she needs to engage in individual therapy sessions 2 to 3 times a week until she gains insight into her own decisions. Couples counseling will be considered later. She agreed to these terms, organized the list, and granted me the necessary access. Later, I disclosed points 5, 6, and 7 sequentially, only after she had completed each requirement. Under the 5th stipulation, she was obligated to confront the wife of the involved individual, confess fully, present all the evidence, and pledge her willingness to testify in court if necessary. At first, she balked, confessing her inability to undertake such an action. I emphasized that her concern for the other person's emotions was superseding the well-being of her own family. I firmly stated that failing to meet these demands would eliminate any possibility of mending our relationship. I was prepared to approach the other man's wife myself should she refuse. Without her accepting responsibility, thoughts of reconciliation were off the table for me. Eventually, albeit with reluctance, she complied and disclosed everything to the other's spouse. The response was furious, involving slaps, kicks, and hair-pulling. Despite the physical attack, my wife didn't fight back, and I decided against intervening to defend her. As a result, she suffered from cuts and bald spots. Later in the car, I divulged to her that the other man had also been seeing another woman besides her. I showed her the proofs gathered by the detective I had hired. I must admit I experienced a pang of guilt for feeling gratified as she grasped she was merely another conquest for this man. Subsequently, she was compelled to talk to our children about the potential effects on our family and to own up to her deeds to our relatives and friends. On my part, I chose to have a 3-month affair, misleading her and indulging in clandestine activities throughout this time. My aim was for her to understand the anguish and embarrassment she had requested me to forgive. I desired for her to realize the possibility of me becoming attached to the person I had an affair with and leaving her after the 3 months. In the end, I would candidly confess everything to her. The 7th phase proved exceedingly challenging for both of us. I simulated infidelity using Tinder and occasionally allowed her glimpses of it. I pretended to be secretly messaging someone. I disappeared for entire nights and weekends, although I was not actually seeing anyone else. I spent those times in hotels, rented cabins, and Airbnb locations, often just getting drunk and weeping. My wife grew increasingly anxious, and I too felt terrible. I loathed it. I was merely pretending, yet even that proved difficult. It seemed she handled it all so effortlessly. It has become progressively difficult for me to perceive her as I once did, which is now the hardest aspect for me. Originally, my intention was to demonstrate my readiness to forgive, but I eventually understood the profound damage such an act could inflict on another. Presently, we are engaged in marital therapy, and although she shows some improvement, I find myself struggling more. Some days are harder than others. Although I have prepared the divorce documents, I have not yet taken that definitive step. The cause of my hesitation remains unclear. Nonetheless, we no longer feel as estranged as before, and at least the arguments have ceased. I suppose this counts as progress. She exhibits true remorse, and I recognize we face a long and uncertain path ahead. The distress I felt while pretending, especially as she seemed to handle it so effortlessly, lingers heavily. Viewing her positively has become difficult. At times, she seems more like a monster to me. I often regret not ending it from the start. However, now we have both progressed significantly. Is there a way I can alter my perception of her? I have managed to forgive other aspects, yet this particular issue continues to preoccupy me. After 7 weeks, I ultimately confessed to her that I had not been involved with anyone else. I could no longer sustain the facade as it was causing me significant distress. Additionally, my wife and I spent the entire night discussing the post I had shown her the previous day. Here is an update including some of our discussions and thoughts. We acknowledge that our chances of recovery are rather slim and it might take years to overcome the worst of it. Yet this morning we both pledged to make a genuine effort. Several comments and statements I made significantly hurt her nonetheless. We succeeded in engaging in an authentic conversation, even though such dialogues aren't always possible. For those who have strong views about me, it's essential to recognize that experiencing this situation firsthand is profoundly different from observing it from a distance. There are no straightforward solutions or clear paths. Feelings run deep, and just getting through each day can be overwhelmingly difficult. To illustrate the challenge of keeping my thoughts clear and making sound choices, consider this metaphor. Imagine living your life on top of a tall mountain where you can see the vast horizon clearly, without any uncertainties clouding your view. Your mind is uncluttered, your thoughts are organized, and you have a firm understanding of who you are, what you want, and your objectives. Now picture being suddenly taken from that mountain and placed inside a dark, enclosed box that is being spun rapidly, causing your blood to rush to your legs. The intensity is such that you feel close to fainting. Your thoughts are scrambled, you're overwhelmed with nausea and dizziness. Out of desperation to alleviate these intense sensations, you would do anything to avoid vomiting. This metaphor accurately reflects the extreme turmoil my mind endures under such conditions. It's inevitable that one might make regrettable choices. I firmly believe that anyone would find it difficult to cope in these situations. To those who argue that we were damaging our children, we respectfully disagree. We have maintained open conversations with our children, who are deeply grateful for our honesty and inclusion in our endeavors. As my youngest plainly expressed, they feel an essential part of our family. They trust us more than we trust ourselves and value our respect for their viewpoints and insights. We have been careful to assure them that they are not responsible for the issues between us, and we have clearly communicated that none of this is their fault. They have voiced their happiness about being part of the decision-making process and supporting both of us. They provide words of comfort and embrace us when they see we need reassurance. They recognize that resolving the issue might be unattainable, but they have made it abundantly clear that they would be disappointed if we didn't try our utmost. The initial months were undoubtedly strained, but once things settled, they were very appreciative of being kept informed, unlike some of their peers whose families are disintegrating. They are thankful to be included, which suggests that our children are better off than we are. I only hope that we don't disappoint them excessively. Regarding those who question my mental soundness and my decisiveness in discussions with my wife about reconciliation, let me clarify that I had no intention of proposing any solutions on the day everything was revealed. Initially, my intent was to quickly conclude it, and even when she returned the next day begging for a chance and willing to do anything, my plan remained to end things. However, at that moment, I found I couldn't follow through. I felt weak, ashamed, and angry. I wanted her to suffer as I had, yet deep down, I still loved her, even if I couldn't admit it or bring myself to end things. After some reflection, I drafted a list and set my terms. I never expected that she would agree to them. The toughest conditions, which I did not expect her to accept, involved revealing the affair to the other person's spouse and being honest with our children, relatives, and friends. Additionally, I never imagined she would support me during what I pretended to be a revenge affair. Truthfully, I hoped she would give up, yet I also desired for her to experience some hardship. I thought her suffering might somehow diminish my own, however, it didn't. As she met every one of my demands, I could no longer question her genuine desire to fix things and her deep remorse for her actions. She has been doing her best to reconcile. Unfortunately, my responses haven't been as forthcoming. I've been searching for reasons to withdraw and leave or even to incite her to do the same. There were moments when I was excessively cruel, directing my frustrations at her. I admit that I can be intimidating. Remarkably, she has endured all this without making any excuses. She does not try to defend herself, she simply bears it. She has assured me she is not afraid of me, but I am not entirely sure she means it. I would never physically harm her, yet I am uncertain about that as well. There have been times when I have nearly crossed that boundary. I sincerely hope that I never do. I am truly afraid I might seriously harm or even kill someone. Regarding her actions, those who asked learned that she felt trapped and suffocated. Our life was too stable and predictable. After the loss of her closest friend, she felt lost and became vulnerable to a deceitful person who knew exactly how to exploit her. Now she feels deceived and is struggling to align her actions with her self-image. We discovered that her affair partner had a history of infidelity, having cheated on his wife with 2 to 3 other women before they started dating. We also found out he has 2 children out of wedlock. As for me, I hadn't fully committed to reconciling. I am a tough person capable of enduring and inflicting pain. I convinced myself that I would find comfort if my wife faced difficulties. I was willing to leave if I found a solid reason. That was a mistake. I've been looking for reasons to keep my distance from her, still nursing deep wounds. My fear of intimacy and getting hurt again has hampered our reconciliation. She is the only one who has been fully committed. Some questioned whether I could offer love as effectively as punishment, and the truth is I couldn't, but now I am striving to change that. While I've forgiven her, I've kept her at a distance, trying to find a reason strong enough to justify leaving over my love for her. I will change that approach and earnestly attempt reconciliation. If we don't succeed, at least I will know I gave it my all, even at the risk of more pain. Many criticize my wife while others recognize that she is human and has erred. Currently, I am tasked with managing the aftermath of her poor decisions, a role I never sought. I've spent considerable time reflecting on this situation. I am not immune to faults either. There are times when I act irrationally and am excessively harsh toward her. My desire to punish her has filled me with rage and hatred, sometimes beyond control. Like her, I've lost control and made poor choices. We are both merely human. I need to find ways for us to move past this together. I will step down from my moral high ground and work to contribute equally 50% to this relationship and our efforts to repair it. Regarding my wife, day by day, she recognized the extent of the hurt I endured. There was no avoiding it, no room for forgiveness, only emptiness. She realized that saving our family was a faint hope, but she was willing to try her best to do so. It is now clear that she never truly loved her affair partner. She was drawn to the excitement, the deceit. She valued my firm and decisive approach. It woke her from the affair fog, brought her back to her senses, and refocused her on what is important. She felt her punishment was deserved, which prevented her from despising herself as much. She deeply thanked Nick for not excusing her actions and for being persistent. She has been more self-critical than I ever was, and at one point she even contemplated suicide, though she resisted because it seemed like an easy way out. I discovered she has been harming herself since D-Day, inflicting bruises and pinches on herself. Her legs are fully covered in shades of purple, a continuous dark mark. However, it's not beneficial. We've agreed that she needs to focus on forgiving herself. Our healing can only begin after that. It's quite unusual now that she is determined to punish herself. She has lost all those characteristics that initially drew me to her sense of humor, her smile, her thoughtfully formed opinions, her confidence, her nurturing patience. They've all faded. It's difficult to reignite my affection for her when she is suppressing the very qualities that made me fall in love with her in the first place, the attributes that compelled me to be with her and marry her. Overall, we've made some progress. Thanks to the helpful strangers online. There's still a lengthy journey ahead, but we've pinpointed some major obstacles to tackle. We actually shared a bed for the first time since that incident, which is a step forward. It felt nice to be close to her once more. I still love her, and it's somewhat hard to come to terms with, but thinking about my children gives me the strength to continue. We'll endeavor to create something new, since the former relationship is no longer sustainable. Update: this will be my final activity on this account, as it has fulfilled its purpose. And I'm profoundly thankful for all the support I've received from everyone. There were times when it was overpowering, but I'm okay. Well, I should say we are okay. Ever since I committed wholeheartedly to reconciliation, there has been a noticeable improvement. We've even begun reconnecting somewhat. My wife, or rather the version of my wife I fell in love with, is slowly starting to emerge again. We've been going to therapy sessions and making substantial progress in our communication. We've also resumed regular intimacy. Although it's still early days and the chances may seem slim, we're experiencing surprisingly positive developments. I'm making an effort to appreciate her daily, and she is reciprocating. Although there are times of intense emotional pain for both of us, on the whole, we are having more good times than bad. I believe we'll be okay. Our children are doing well, and I remain hopeful for the future. Update: I've received requests for an update. We're currently living separately. Initially, our reconciliation efforts were proceeding well, and my wife was doing her part diligently. However, she's struggling to forgive herself and is filled with self-loathing. On my part, I managed to hide my emotions for a while, but underneath, my feelings were still festering. Feelings of emasculation, betrayal, lies, humiliation, and anger were all simmering below the surface. As a result, I reverted to being mean, vindictive, and angry, and I no longer want to be that type of person. So we decided to separate to give ourselves some breathing room. We might try reconciliation again later for the sake of the children. That's where things stand now. Sometimes it's just not possible to completely mend things. I'm not very hopeful about us making it in the end. This narrative impresses with its resilience and motivates self-betterment. It shows that even in the most challenging situations, individuals are capable of tapping into internal resources for change and growth. The crucial aspect is making the right choices and consistently pursuing objectives. Story 2: my wife, who was 35 and had been married to me for 2 years, was a college instructor when these events unfolded. She had invested considerable effort to secure this position and was rightfully proud of her achievement. Her parents were also proud, and we held a large celebration for her graduation and new job. Our entire family was present, and we even postponed our wedding at her request so she could pursue her ideal career. This job was everything to her, and I couldn't imagine her jeopardizing it in any manner. Yet that's exactly what happened. She developed close relationships with some of her students, who were in their late 20s, placing them not far apart in age. It was peculiar to me that she was so friendly with her students while still maintaining her role as their instructor, but I kept my concerns to myself. She spoke of joining them at gatherings, which she described as casual meetings rather than formal events. She also mentioned that they discussed class material, because her students were enthusiastic and dedicated. Despite my reservations, I didn't get involved. Looking back, I should have counseled her not to blur the lines between her job and personal time, but she was ecstatic. She felt as though she was soaring and truly making a difference in their lives. She consistently came home early because she didn't want to leave me alone all evening, and she limited her outings to a couple of times a month. I knew something was off when she didn't come home until 2 a.m. I stayed up waiting, which led to a heated argument. She claimed she was just assisting her students, but I found that hard to accept. I was intent on discovering the truth while she stood by her story. When I proposed she should cut back on her socializing with the students, she reacted angrily, accusing me of being controlling and broke down crying. She insisted she was a mature individual entitled to her personal life, particularly since she had found someone who brought her joy. I was shocked she hastily amended her statement, saying she was confused from the argument and exhaustion. Her slip concerned me, but I was too exhausted to continue the debate that night. I couldn't even bring myself to suggest she take time off from her job. I was unsure about how or when to bring up the subject again. I felt I should act, but I opted to wait and watch what she did next. Things settled for a bit. She stopped coming home late and stuck to the route between work and our house. It seemed fine, and since she had grading to do, I gave her space. Then I caught a glimpse of her texting someone, which made her jump. It was odd, but I didn't make a scene. I thought about checking her phone later, but it had a passcode. My idea was to have her students over and remain discreetly present to see who they were and if something else was happening. But she foiled my plan when I mentioned spending an evening with my mom at the care facility. She was overly eager, praising me for my thoughtfulness, and offered to drive me, promising to retrieve me later to keep me unsuspecting. I agreed and headed home, a journey of about 20 minutes. I was unsure of what I might discover, and while it was hard to believe my spouse would do anything unfaithful, at times I nearly persuaded myself that my suspicions were unfounded and thought about going back to my mother's. Yet I turned back. Upon my return, I noticed a strange car outside our home. She thought she had plenty of time for her rendezvous before picking me up. The sight of the car unnerved me, and I rushed to our entrance. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, and was met with the most shocking sight: my wife in an intimate encounter with her student, both partially clothed. At that moment I took a picture. After all, we live in a digital era. I had my phone out, ready to document any proof. Had the situation been innocent, I might have seemed foolish, but now the grim reality hit me. She got dressed quickly, and her student departed. She yelled things I couldn't fully process as my mind spun, and all I could concentrate on was my racing heartbeat. I knew then that our marriage had ended, and the life I had envisioned with her was in ruins. Her professional life was in tatters. She would not be returning to that school, and any future employer would surely question her departure from this one. I came to my senses and confronted her regarding her decision to risk everything she had diligently achieved with one of her initial students. She faced me with an expressionless gaze and confessed that he had invited her out, and she hadn't foreseen any misconduct. I erupted in anger, exclaiming that a grave offense had indeed taken place. She had brought him into our house, and their interaction had turned intimate. She responded defiantly, gesturing rudely at me, and argued it wasn't her fault, insinuating that, because I had interrupted them, it was insignificant. I was utterly astounded by her logic and found myself unable to respond. I gathered my things and moved into a hotel, unwilling to argue further about who should vacate the house that evening. It was like handling a stubborn child who thought she could avoid repercussions due to her past achievements. I decided not to remain and determined to ensure she didn't keep her position. I initiated divorce proceedings and presented the photograph to the university president. As anticipated, she was terminated. She harbored intense bitterness towards me, avoiding any contact during our occasional encounters. She transitioned from a confident, flawless, high-performing individual to someone consumed by guilt and humiliation. Even her parents were perplexed and asked to see the photograph, which I sent them reluctantly. She failed to secure a position at any university in our state, and after several years, she moved away, likely due to her employment struggles. I started dating again, adopting a new cautious approach, mindful not to hastily trust or presume honesty in others. My day began like any other. I woke up early, prepared myself, kissed Emily goodbye while she was still asleep, and headed to my construction job, unaware of the shock that awaited me. That typical day soon became extraordinary in the evening at the construction site. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and read a message from my neighbor, Mike. He stated, "Dustin, your garage door is open." This was odd, as I distinctly remembered closing it. I thanked Mike and requested he shut it if it wasn't too much trouble. He agreed, and I resumed my work. Nevertheless, the open garage door kept nagging at me. Unsure why, I decided to trust my instincts and took an early lunch break to drive home. As I neared my house, my pulse quickened. I noticed an unfamiliar car in my driveway, a sight I had never encountered before. At that moment, a sickening feeling washed over me. I stealthily parked my truck on the street and quietly walked to my home. I silently opened the side door to the garage, which was locked. The door linking the garage to the house was also unlocked. Moving through the house barefoot, I discovered a heart-wrenching scene: my wife, Emily, entwined with a stranger. They were deeply engrossed in a kiss, scantily clad, right before my eyes. Anger clouded my vision, and I felt sick. I stepped back slightly, grabbed my phone, made sure the flash was off, and captured several photos and a video of them together in our home. In that moment, it became evident that seeking revenge wouldn't yield true satisfaction. The best approach was to make Emily fully aware of what she was jeopardizing. It was time for a well-considered plan, one that would help me preserve my dignity. Despite what I had witnessed, I paused to regain composure, then left the house quietly, my heart heavy yet resolute, with a strategy taking shape in my mind. I reached out to a friend who was a lawyer. I recounted the entire episode to him and sought his guidance. Since we were in North Carolina, I needed evidence to possibly lessen any alimony I might have to pay. Equipped with the evidence, I showed it to my lawyer friend. Though he was not a divorce attorney, he pointed me in the right direction and clarified the crucial steps needed to safeguard myself. He provided the details of a reputable divorce attorney who could offer further assistance. He mentioned she was highly skilled. When I encountered the divorce attorney, I did not hesitate. I divulged every detail. She explained that North Carolina is a no-fault state, yet adultery could affect alimony for the spouse who receives it. We prepared the divorce paperwork and planned our approach going forward. Emily was completely unaware of the developments. A few days afterward, my attorney and I scheduled a meeting with Emily at a neighborhood cafe. She seemed taken aback to see me, her eyes widening in disbelief, and questioned, "Dustin, what's going on?" I pushed the divorce papers towards her, and her face shifted from confused to astonished. She faltered, "Dustin, I'm lost." I gazed at her, feeling a pang in my heart, and responded, "Emily, I believe you understand. I caught you with him." Her complexion turned ashen, and realization seemed to dawn on her. Tears formed in her eyes as she offered her apologies. Although she was distressed, I was convinced I was making the correct choice. Over time, Emily resisted signing the divorce papers. By that time, I had vacated our home and secured a simple apartment for myself, since the house was owned by Emily's parents. That didn't concern me. The day after she received the divorce documents, her parents intervened and provided financial assistance for her to engage her own lawyer. Nevertheless, her parents didn't know the reason behind our divorce, and I assumed Emily wouldn't share the specifics either. Therefore, I decided to reveal the photos and video I had captured of her with another man in our home. I dispatched a package to her parents detailing the reasons for our divorce. Roughly 6 weeks later, at the divorce hearing, her parents were absent. My lawyer indicated she intended to seek alimony. She admitted it was unlikely to prevail but wished to keep me informed. After hearing the claims made by my wife's attorney on her behalf, they alleged I was a deficient provider and had behaved disrespectfully in court. My wife persisted in spreading untruths. At one juncture, the judge cautioned her to be truthful in court, noting that lying could have repercussions, which she was already engaging in. Thankfully, we presented our proof to the judge, who consequently granted me the divorce and refused her any alimony. The judge gave precisely 30 days for me to collect my remaining items from our home. Only a few boxes were left to gather. About 3 months after the divorce, I planned to retrieve my possessions. As I entered the driveway, I noticed her friend's car, which was familiar, parked there. Initially, seeing his car was distressing, but the discomfort soon faded. This time, the garage door was intentionally left open for me to pick up my belongings. Emily had sent a message suggesting we meet soon, which I received one day. Intrigued by her motives, I agreed. We convened at the same diner where I had served her with the divorce papers. She no. Londa looked the assured and satisfied woman she once was. Instead, she appeared as a mere echo of her former self. She spoke, recounting the hardships she faced recently. She admitted remorse for her actions and confessed missing me deeply. Despite this, her words barely affected me. I remained detached and uninterested throughout her entire dialogue. When she concluded, I expressed, "Emily, I wish you well, but that chapter of my life is over." Even though I clarified my position, she continued trying to influence my decision, asserting she had terminated things with the other individual and hoped for our reunion. As I departed from the cafe, I recognized that I had grown stronger, not because Emily was repentant or distressed, but because I had attained peace within myself. My life had improved, I had discovered my inner resilience, and was gradually reconstructing my life, step by step. The most satisfying form of revenge was not through physical altercations or public humiliation, but by progressing in life with greater strength and insight than before. About 7 months later, Emily's father passed away from cancer. He never voiced remorse over his initial fury when he found out about our divorce. In contrast, her mother offered apologies and invited him to her funeral. I thought about not going, yet held no grudge against her mother. I am not one to nurture negative emotions towards others. The past cannot be changed. As time went on, whispers emerged that Emily was sinking further into legal predicaments. She got caught for driving under the influence over a weekend, and her current partner was involved in questionable deeds, including smuggling prescription medications from her mother's residence. How did I come to know all this? Her mother keeps in touch with me from time to time. Our marriage spanned 8 years before it unraveled, which could have qualified her for alimony for about half that period, but she pushed forward with the divorce, affecting the final agreement. This narrative of divorce and its aftermath highlights the importance of protecting one's well-being and interests, regardless of obstacles. The main character in this story exhibited resilience, the ability to make tough decisions, and the capability to progress through the most difficult periods. This third tale reveals unforeseen turns of destiny involving love, deceit, hard decisions, and the possibility of a new start. Dive into this captivating story that will encourage you to reflect on the nature of human connections and the power of forgiveness. I met my wife 7 years ago and married her 6 months later. Our son was born 4.5 years after. Initially, we were the perfect family. She was a devoted wife and an exceptional mother. Nevertheless, she grew detached, then moody and overly demanding. She criticized that I made too little money, paid little attention to her and our child, despite me living solely for our family. Her behavior deteriorated daily, yet I could never have foreseen her unfaithfulness. Although I was told they had spotted her with a man in a restaurant, I ignored it. I will forever remember the day we came back with my son from the country house and found neither her nor her belongings nor her documents at home. The savings we had been gathering for the apartment's renovation had vanished too. She left a note confessing she had always loved another man and had married me only in an attempt to forget him. After many years, he found her and now she wanted to be with him. She thanked me for our time together, asked for my forgiveness, urged me not to look for her and to forget her as swiftly as possible. She also asked me to care for our son and assured that as soon as circumstances allowed, she would definitely take him away. She requested that I devise an explanation for her disappearance, hoping that maybe someday he would understand and forgive her, just as I had. At that moment, the world seemed to turn upside down for me. I felt like an abandoned puppy, but my deepest sorrow was for my son. He was very attached to his mother, loved her deeply, and her leaving could potentially devastate a child's emotional stability. I had to concoct that Mom had gone to Africa to aid ill children and that she would return as soon as she cured everyone. The reason for her lack of calls or letters was that in the jungles of Africa there were no phones or mail, but she would write as soon as she could. Juggling work and raising my child alone was profoundly challenging. Whenever possible, a cousin would pick him up from preschool, spend time with him, but it was clear that my son greatly missed his mother's love and care. He asked about his mom daily, how she was doing, and made drawings for her. Clearly, due to my work commitments, I could not give enough time to my son, and he spent much time alone. I couldn't send him to a boarding school, bring another woman into our home, or start to rebuild my personal life. Firstly, I had no time between work, home, and son. Secondly, as a single father, I wasn't much in demand. Thirdly, I found it impossible to explain to my son why, while his mother was overseas aiding ill children, I was involved with another woman. From his perspective, my actions would appear unfaithful. Additionally, I was compelled to buy 2 presents for each holiday, one from me and another supposedly from his mother. I arranged for someone I knew to write cards and letters as if they were from her, filled with expressions of love and hopes for a future reunion. For 18 months, I received no communication from my wife. I continued to deceive my son, unsure if she was even alive. I managed to save some money and arranged a vacation for myself and my son. He relished the trip, and I began to think he was slowly healing. However, during a visit to a stunning temple in one of the cities, everything changed. As we walked out into the courtyard, my son froze and stared. Despite my efforts to move him along, he screamed, "Mommy," loudly. Amidst the temple's bustling environment, where landscaping work was ongoing, I recognized a familiar face. Indeed, it was my wife. She observed us briefly, then wept, covered her face, and disappeared. I, convinced my son he was mistaken, took him back to our hotel and vowed to investigate further. I returned to the temple alone initially. There I spoke with the bishop, who informed me that 4 months earlier, a distressed young homeless woman had appeared, dressed in rags and claiming to be burdened by severe sins, even considering becoming a nun. I asked to meet her, and when she appeared, she was a shadow of the woman I had known. Gone were her pride, defiance, and stubbornness. Seated beside me was a shell of a person, devoid of joy, with a spirit crushed and tormented. She was utterly broken. At first we sat in silence, then she started to share that she believed there was no forgiveness for her actions. She professed she was unworthy of being a mother and felt she had no right to live. It was more than just abandoning her son and me, although she claimed she thought of us daily. Something graver had occurred. I thought nothing could be worse than what she had already done to us, but I was wrong. Previously, she had been involved with a man she had loved deeply, who was active in a local youth group and a charming suitor. They had planned to marry, but then he was jailed for theft and murder. He advised her against waiting for him, claiming that after his release there would be no future for them, but he said this only to protect her. Afterward, she met me. By then, her attitude towards relationships had changed, and then he was unexpectedly released early and sought her out. He confessed he still had feelings for her. Emotions rekindled, she chose not to deceive anyone or live a double life. That's why she left, though leaving her son was hard. He convinced her that her son would be a burden until he could establish himself, recommending that the boy stay with me instead. Later, it turned out he was unwilling to raise another man's child and desired only their own. When she approached him, she was already pregnant with my child. Immediately, he demanded an abortion, particularly late term, which led to a complicated procedure performed in a nearly criminal, low-cost clinic, resulting in an infection that left her sterile. Despite still being legally married, she had the abortion. 6 months later, he abandoned her for another woman who could bear him children. Returning to our family after everything seemed inconceivable to her, she felt she had forfeited all rights. She attempted suicide but survived, subsequently spending 3 months in a psychiatric ward, clinging to a pillow as though it were her child. Eventually wandering, finding shelter wherever possible, and surviving on whatever she could find, she ended up near the temple that took her in. Here she confessed her sins and decided to stay, pledging to beg for divine forgiveness for her deeds until her end and to continue praying for me and our son. In response, I told her that her choices deprived one of my children of life and the other of maternal love and care. She compelled me to deceive my son, yet I am determined not to maintain that deception indefinitely. She made choices on behalf of all of us, and now, if my son had not retained his memory of her, I would shun her. But he recalls that mother, the truly compassionate mother who tended to ill children in Africa. To deceive my son once more is something I cannot allow. Therefore, she is hurriedly packing her things, changing out of her ceremonial attire, and we are on our way to the hotel where her son is waiting for us, and from there we will return home. She must seek atonement not from a higher power but from her son, and not through supplication but through noble deeds. She began to protest, citing her inability, to which I responded that if that were the case, I would bring my son to her, and she would have to admit the truth to him herself. Yet unveiling the truth might shatter the boy, morally devastate him, and potentially embitter him. I cannot renounce my conviction, nor could she. He has been affected by her absence, and it has worn on him. His dreams are consumed by thoughts of his mother's return, and if she possesses even an ounce of empathy, she would join me without hesitation. She acquiesced, changed her clothes, collected her items, said her goodbyes to the temple community, engaged in a lengthy dialogue with the priest, and within 3 hours, we reached the hotel where our son was waiting. The details of their reunion need not be spelled out. It was an emotional encounter, replete with tears, feelings, and everything that comes with such moments. Once back home, her regret is palpable. She has resolved never to leave her son again, and he is inseparable from her. Her demeanor has undergone a transformation from the woman I once knew. She has become soft, submissive, and devout, attending church with regularity, praying fervently, and often quoting holy texts. Regarding our relationship, she exerts every effort to earn my forgiveness, striving to repair the damage she caused. I, in turn, do nothing to either support or obstruct these attempts. Maybe time will lead to forgiveness, but for now, it is clear that her return was for the benefit of our son alone. This concludes my account, and you may draw your own conclusions. The central messages from this tale underscore the importance of honesty and openness in relationships, the way hardship informs our decisions, and the power of forgiveness and the chance for new beginnings. This narrative serves as a beacon, reminding us that life is filled with unexpected twists, and it's essential to maintain hope for improved circumstances, even when things seem beyond repair.